want to begin with a few lines from St. Paul in his letter to the people of Philippi. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things, ponder such things. What a sentence, what an invitation, what a orienting compass. And here Paul is writing as a recent, I guess you would say, convert. I don't know technically the language he might have used, but certainly came to change his mind about something extremely important around his own faith, and going from being a persecutor of this new movement centered around Jesus of Nazareth to being a follower here, a disciple, an apostle, a preacher. In a very dangerous time, an extremely dangerous time to change your mind on such things and to align yourself with a higher order, what Jesus called the kingdom of God. In a kingdom, in an empire with a different set of values and systems of power. And what I find so kind of striking and like contemporary and fresh and challenging about Paul's words has to do with the age that we find ourselves in, which it seems to me is an age of mistrust and uncertainty and fear and doubt and finger pointing and kind of self-righteous moral posturing and who's up and who's down and everything's getting turned up to 11 and who is evil and who is good and who's the defender of all things good and who's the perpetrator of all things evil, and these extreme binaries that are soaking up all of our headspace and our emotional space and even our ideas. And Paul, as a follower of Jesus, certainly persecuted by his own Jewish community and also by the empire itself that considered Christianity, this new movement, an illegal religion. And in the face of all this, maybe at an age of uncertainty and fear and doubt and mistrust and finger pointing and scapegoating, his encouragement, his admonishment, his compass here. Listen to these words. Whatever is true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, ponder such things. Now, you don't even have to get into what does he really mean by each of these words. I can feel just the general tenor here, the general line of encouragement. When was the last time you did any of these things? And I'm saying you, but I'm really talking to myself here. Would you say this is what's being exercised on Twitter and on CNN and on your social media feed? Whatever is noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy. No, of course not. That doesn't sell. And so I think Paul has some things to offer here. In fact, I want to begin with Paul and I want to end with Paul. I'm going to read some other things from Philippians. And maybe what I'm doing right now is an old-fashioned sermon. And I love sermons. Sermon comes from a kind of root word that means to string together, like beads, or to thread together. And maybe to a certain extent, that's what I'm called to do in the world, and at least I feel compelled to do, is to try to thread things together into some sort of coherent coherent thread that connects to something larger, something bigger. And that's what I feel is beneath this. Is there anything that can help us transcend our own, our own propensity to go in the opposite direction of this passage, to think about whatever is divisive and dangerous and not worthy of trust? And that's most of the time what we want to ponder. And is there any ways to transcend that maybe capacity that we all carry, and even to transcend to align ourselves to a higher order here? And that's kind of a dangerous word, higher order, in an age that mistrusts all forms of hierarchy, that one thing can be better than another, or be more valuable than another. It's very countercultural. But that's the kind of question I'm asking. What helps us transcend? So I've been thinking about faith. I've been thinking about Christianity. I've been thinking about Paul and some lines that he offers. One of the things I love about the New Testament, this is true of the entire Bible, is that they didn't know they were writing the New Testament. You don't know that you're writing something that will one day be collected in a collection of books and deemed sacred and transcendent in some way. And so the writing is somewhat raw and innocent. In a way, it doesn't even think too highly of itself. And that's what I love about the way that Paul writes. And anyway, so those are some questions I have, like, what helps us transcend? And I'm not saying escape from. I really am not. Maybe you know that the word idiot means one who doesn't care about the polis or the city. That's the technical definition of an idiot. And a lot of times I'm an idiot. I turn away from politics, or I look down my nose, or I have at least. And, in high school, we used to try to get people not to vote for the homecoming court because it was, quote, a popularity contest, this kind of rebellious, I don't want to play the game. It's probably more like, I can't really play the game. No one's going to vote me in. So therefore the game is no good. But yeah, I don't want to be an idiot to turn my back. I think we are facing some really important decisions around the future of this country for the next 4 years. And I'm not ignoring that. In fact, I think we ought to think seriously and carefully about policies and ideas. And I've changed my mind on a lot of policies and ideas in the last few years. And some of that, I'm not always good at it, but I've even taken to, from time to time, writing things out. Like, okay, what are the issues? And what does this side say or that side say? And to write it out and to think about it. Where do I really align, instead of, to speak of popularity contests, just to allow the being inundated with all this persona magnification, which is what an ad is, and to not be totally consumed and swayed by, I don't like this person or that person. I don't like their personality. Anyway, I'm just trying to turn over again this question of what helps us transcend. And in that sense, I want to give an old-fashioned sermon here, and I want to, maybe I've already said, a direct challenge from Paul here. Well, think about these things, ponder these things. Let that be a way of orienting to the world. And he says some even more challenging things, which I'll come to in a moment. So that's where I'm going. Welcome to Hints and Guesses. Kent here. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I want to offer one possibility. for you. I have a course that will be every Sunday night in the month of November and December. And it's really a continuation of something I did a couple years ago. I offered a class on the book Iron John by Robert Bly, and it was for men only. And it turned out to be, well, it was a 9-month course. It was amazing. I learned a lot. We all learned a lot. We grew. And that group has more or less stayed together and in conversation. And we'll meet from time to time. And there's a kind of email exchange that turns over some of the things that were brought up during this 9-month course. And we've been talking about offering something else. So that's coming in November, December. So not everyone, but most people from that group will make up the core group of men that are going to gather. And we're going to look at Robert Johnson's book, The Fisher King and the Handless Maiden. It's masculine and feminine dimensions of the psyche. And anyway, that's the train we're going to cover. And we decided let's open it up just a little bit to a few extra spots. Someone else who might be interested in looking at this book together and talking about it and asking questions and learning from one another. And I love the idea that it's every Sunday night. If you miss a Sunday, that's okay. We record each session and send it out. And we'll have people from all over, from Australia and New Zealand and England and different places in America, and it will be on Sunday evenings at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it bridges some possibilities, transcontinental possibilities. So if you're interested, I don't even have it on my website, but send me an email, dobsonpilgrimage@gmail.com. I'll send you the info, and we can kind of go from there. So I wanted to offer a little ad, and maybe the other thing I want to say is a couple new patrons joined, which means a lot. Thank you so much. If you want to support this podcast, patreon.com/Kent Dobson. That's the best way to do it. Any dollar amount really helps. And I want to keep this podcast going no matter what. I'm moving back to Michigan. We'll be looking for work and kind of sort of reorienting my life. In no way do I intend for this podcast to go on the back burner. I will continue to put things out. In fact, I've got an interview that you'll enjoy coming up here shortly. Anyway, I just want to thank my patrons. It really does mean a lot. You keep this thing going. And many of you have been supporting this podcast for a long time. So special thanks to each of you. And if you want to join this community, you're more than welcome to do so. And look forward to meeting you in that way. Okay. I want to string together 3 things here. A few lines from T.S.Eliot from his poem, The Four Quartets, on which this podcast is based. The phrase hints and guesses is in The Four Quartets, actually right after this little section I want to read. And I want to pull on the thread of some ideas from Jung, particularly around what he calls the statistical man, which I think is a funny phrase, and also his sort of warnings about mass movement mentality. And then I want to look again at some very simple things that Paul, in his letter to the people of Philippi, just some simple things that he invites us. Not that they're simple to do; they're actually very much not easy to do. But they're simple in one sense, and I guess are proving to me to be the right kind of ancient voice, the right kind of ancient way coming forth, like cottonwood seeds floating in the wind down the canyons of time. These invitations are potent and meaningful and powerful, and might get into just the right cracks in our hearts and open up into a richer way of being in the world. Okay. Here's some T.S. Eliot. I do not know much about gods, but I think the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. Now, a quick pause here. Credit where credit is due. I've been listening to James Finley's podcast, Turning to the Mystics, and each season he picks a new mystic, and this season is T.S.Eliot and this poem. So this poem is like going in deep for me. Both my wife and I, we both love James Finley. She studied at the Center for Action and Contemplation with him, and I've heard him a few times in person. He's a really important person just in my own life, and very much embodies even while he's talking, embodies the kind of contemplative posture that he invites the listener into. Anyway, so he just did a podcast on this. So I'm just saying, I was inspired by this passage and even by what he says about this passage, but I want to expand on it just a little bit. I do not know much about gods, but I think the river is a strong, brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. And I live here in Georgia for the moment, and we were directly in line with the eye of the hurricane that came up roaring out of the Gulf of Mexico and smashing into Georgia and causing all kinds of destruction right through the middle of the state and into South Carolina and North Carolina and Tennessee. And it was a really kind of scary time because, well, first of all, unlike antiquity, there's all this anticipation, it's like on the news and just glued to my phone and to the computer and watching and tracking and worried about my horses and should we put them in the barn or just let them go loose in case something happens or a tree falls on the barn, which is very possible. And there's kind of no right way to, when confronted with such sheer power, to know what to do. And there was so much flooding. And I set my alarm for 5 a.m. because that's when the eye of the hurricane was passing right over where we live here. And I got up and it was very eerie because it was completely still and no rain as the eye moved across where I live. And like that kind of, there almost like a kind of deep emptiness and feeling of smallness standing out in the woods like this. And then the really the backside of the hurricane struck and all this wind and rain. And in some ways we were very lucky being located exactly where we were. In fact, to the east of us, the damage was much worse. And moving up from there, my aunt lives in South Carolina, was without power for a couple of weeks, and the National Guard was up there and really had no help for a really long period of time, as most mountain people are kind of forgotten by the world, like where my aunt lives, and very rural and independent people, and a lot of just survival by helping one's neighbor is what was going on. And I have friends in North Carolina as well. And I don't know, there's something like humbling about these lines. I do not know much about gods, but I think the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. It's like, whoa. A friend of mine told me that I-40, which is one of the highways that was washed out, was, when it was built, the river itself was directed, as often is the case when bridges are made or roads are made, that they'll make slight adjustments to the wild, untamed river which makes the most sense for a road. And I'm not even saying that this is wrong, but suddenly the river reverted to its ancient course in a matter of hours. All that power, all that untamed, really transcendent power, something that human beings, we forget about in the modern world with all of our roads and bridges and power lines, and in no way am I diminishing the loss here, the loss of life and of property, and of security and stability. I mourn that, I lament that, but it's like every once in a while something comes roaring up from the gulf, from the abyss, from out of nowhere, that reminds us just how small we are as human beings. Listen to his lines again. Sullen, untamed, and intractable. Patient to some degree. At first recognized as a frontier. The river is like a frontier. There it is. I'm gonna cross it. I'm gonna move it. A frontier useful, untrustworthy, as a conveyor of commerce. I think about Grand Rapids where I'm moving, and the Grand River was used in the 1800s and early 1900s as the conveyor belt for logging. And other than a few trees in the Upper Peninsula, every single tree was cut down in the state of Michigan. Many of them floated down the Grand River into what was the furniture capital of the world at the time, a conveyor of commerce. Only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities. Yeah, okay, we've dealt with that. Except when the river decides, the world decides to be itself in all of its untamed power and revert to its ancient courses. Almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities, ever, however, implacable, keeping its seasons. It's almost like it's on a different mode of time. And rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget. That's how I felt, standing out there in the emptiness of the middle of the eye of a hurricane, in the middle of Georgia, hundreds of miles from the sea. Yeah, what have I forgotten? What have I chosen to forget? Unhonored, unpropitiated by worshipers of the machine, but waiting. Worshipers of the machine. Yeah, that about sums up our modern world. And I think one of the things I find so compelling about, I guess I could call it the biblical worldview, or the worldviews that were apparent in antiquity, that gave birth to the biblical passages. There is a lot more humility about the mystery of nature itself. Of course, nature is a manifestation of God, from a Judeo-Christian point of view, and it's humbling. It's humbling, and we forget about it. As soon as we dwell in cities, as soon as everything works and is on time, we forget about it. And the river, he goes on, is within us. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. Not only is kind of the wild, untamed mystery all around us, even if we forget, it's also within us. There's a kind of abyss inside. There's a kind of river of possibility that is beneath the ego. In fancy words, we would call that the unconscious. But the unconscious is like that. It's like we don't even know, we don't even understand the forces that are at work in our own lives. We might say we believe this or that, or committed to this or that, or would vote strongly for this person or that person, but there's also an underworld inside. There's an untamed river that has its own intelligence and runs its own course. So what Finley said about this passage, he said, the river is the primordial. It's the primordial. It's the presence of the timeless and time, the intersection of timelessness and time. That's the theme of almost all of the four quartets. Where is eternity shot through in the temporal, in the ordinary? Are we just slaves to chronos, chronological time? That's what this poem is dragging up here, chronology. And most of us are, as we look at our watches and phones and schedules and the tyranny of chronos, and which is always ticking away. And it's like well, who's Peter Pan's nemesis? Captain Hook. I can't believe I forgot that for a moment. He's got that clock. The clock is ticking. Tick 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 tick. And inside the alligator or the crocodile that will one day eat him, tick tick tick. That's chronos, and we're tyrannized by it. This is all there is. That's why there's, in a way, so much desperation. I think as religion fades into the background, politics is taking up all that religious space, and we're infusing it with good and evil and ultimate meaning. And this is all there is. If this person is elected, it's over. My life is over. Everything I know is over. It's like that kind of fear and trepidation, because it's the crocodile tick here, tick, tick, tick. But the rivers reminds us of the primordial, of the eternal, of the flow of life, of the life-death-life cycle, of the smallness and also magnificence of the human life, and the luminous pause between life and death, to quote from Jung here. The river, in a way, is a manifestation of God, of the untamed God. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that I think more exposure to storms and wind and rain and heat and lightning, in a way, is an invitation to fall on our knees again, to look toward what transcends chronological time. And the ancient word for that was kairos, the fullness of time. Kairos and chronos operating as poles here, as opposites, as paradoxes. And it's like in the midst of chronological time, a moment of kairos breaks out, the fullness of time. And that's what this storm is like, if we'll let it be, like the fullness of time, that raising questions like, does anything transcend here? What transcends here? What ultimately transcends our inability to even control the weather? How are we to relate to the primordial is the question at hand. Like I said before, maybe even in the last podcast, we're not the captains of our fate or the masters of our soul, unlike Invictus proudly proclaims. But all systems have their weaknesses. All human roads have their weaknesses. And how are we to relate to the primordial, to the flow of life, to the strong brown God? And it's not a question that can be answered. I think it's more of a posture, maybe even a prayerful posture in which we're invited to stand. It's a posture of humility. Humus meaning, humility from humus, earthiness. And man, I need more of that in my life. And this brings me to some ideas and thoughts I got from Jung. So Jung likes to talk about, kind of playfully in a way, what he calls the statistical world or statistical man. He means humankind, he doesn't mean male. And what is the statistical world? It's the material world, it's the social world, which we can see and measure and of course is real. It's not unreal, it's real. It's concrete knowledge. Like I know a storm is coming because I'm watching it on television, and I can gather data. And it's the world of science and technology. And sometimes we treat the world, especially in the modern age, the world of science and technology and statistics and as the only realities. And that's one of, I think, the dangers of treating human beings as statistical models or statistical realities. That's a warning that Jung has. He says, don't forget the person in front of you is a mystery. They're a mystery to themselves. They're not a statistic. And the statistical world is not bad. It's just limited. It's limited in how it perceives what's real. It's limited in how it relates to the primordial, for example, to the strong brown God. It's the world that turns rivers into conveyors of commerce and then forgets all about them. And I think the statistical world, as I'm using it, in a way, is all that's left when religion and spirituality are gone. When religion is chased out of the room as old superstitions and backwards, unenlightened modes of thinking and believing, as if it's just magic. And religion and spirituality are chased out of the room, and all that's left is our concrete clinging to what we call reality, to the statistical world and all of its map, and the way we've chosen to map and model and so forth. And so, but there's a problem with this. We'd say, well, isn't that good on the one hand? I mean, wasn't there some magical thinking in antiquity, and didn't people believe things that aren't real in that sense? And of course, I would agree with that. We don't have to be so complete in our, or we don't have to succumb to either or thinking when it comes to this. Like our ancestors believe things that we don't hold to be true anymore. And we say, okay, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's the way growth happens. But what creeps in, once religion is chased out of the room here, the religious instinct is still at work. And this is something I've talked about on this podcast before. I mean, the religious instinct is instinctual, deeply human compass that points toward ultimate meaning. None of us get out of it. So what we do is we say, okay, religion is no good. And I think this is what I've personally changed my mind on. You know, I was of the mind of, I'm kind of spiritual but not religious, and we need to sort of get away from, quote, organized religion and doctrines and statements and all that archaic, prancing around with incense and set prayers and so forth. And can't we just grow up here? And I've really changed my mind on that. I personally, I think, misunderstood even what religion was. I had that kind of John Lennon naivety and imagine no religion. Well, that's impossible if there's such a thing as the religious instinct, which craves ultimate meaning. And so what we do is the instinct doesn't go away, and it goes right toward the statistical world, and we become fundamentalists. It's like the old fundamentalism shows back up again. And we can see that all around. I mean, the kind of ideologies or even identity politics, which I pick on from time to time on this podcast, it's like there's such intense religious fundamentalism that fuels this kind of thing. So you can chase away religion, but you end up becoming a kind of fundamentalist for the wrong things, in my opinion, for things that do not point beyond themselves to transcendence, to the primordial, to God, to the sacred, to the divine. And we end up easily succumbing to whatever answers were given by the statistical models and to the leaders that promote them. And of course, one of the huge warnings that Jung is on about again and again and again is how we're also, in addition, affected by mass movements. By wanting, by chasing God out of the room and expecting a mass movement, an ideology, a camp, progressive, liberal, conservative, traditional, to be our parent. What he calls the kingdom of childhood. He says a mass movement puts us in the kingdom of childhood and is full of cheap slogans and ruthlessness. And the moment you veer from it, it's like a tyrannical parent, and it wants to punish you and cast you out and make you unworthy, and all of the things that we criticize religion for. It's really an adolescent move. The mass movement puts us back into that early adolescence where this is to quote Plotkin, peer group, sex, and society is all there is. Who am I sleeping with? Who's my group? And where's the enemy group? And it's all about society. Where do I fit in? The one up, one down. And if you listen to the way people are talking today, I have done this myself. I'm not above any of this, but it's like, as soon as we start talking about, I just think this, or I just believe this, often we're just playing a kind of moral gamesmanship here that I am more righteous than you. That's what I think is the subtext of most of American politics right now. I'm righteous and you're unrighteous. And I think that's just really dangerous ground. And Jung was, of course, saying after 2 world wars, he's saying this is where it leads, to tyranny, to world war, to hatred of the other, to expulsion of the other, to destruction of the other. So be careful here. And I think one of the great losses as religion kind of slips through our fingers like sand here, which I'm not promoting, by the way, what we're losing is a consistent way of relating to the transcendent, to the larger, to the mystery, to God. In the name of chasing away certain superstitions, we lose the capacity to relate to the ultimate, is probably the simplest way of saying it. And also to lend ourselves to what healthy religion, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, you name it, has always promoted, which is an experience of interchange. It's not just the external structures here, but a kind of possibility of interchange and of growth, of self-reflection, of wisdom. So I think, what have we lost here? And Jung contrasts the statistical man or humanity, the statistical human, with what he calls the real human. And I'm kind of picking and choosing. I'm pulling out a couple of beads here. And what do we mean by real human? He says a real human is in relationship with the transcendent, and is in a new process of self-reflection, of deeper reflection, and is open to inner growth and change, and to, here's a direct quote, a synthesis of unconscious factors, weaving together what is split apart and fragmented and isolated and neglected and denied. And all of what we see in the larger culture of finger pointing and scapegoating and shadow boxing, and the other is the problem. He says that's not the path. The path is down into the psyche, into the inner realms, where there's a stringing together and a synthesis of our unconscious factors. And he says symbols help. Like what kind of symbols? Like the cross. The cross is a coincidence of opposites. It's the transcendent and the immanent, the up and the down. It's the left and the right. It somehow holds suffering and love together until it can do its work. And that's the kind of powerful symbol of synthesis that we need, instead of like these statistical realms of ideology and ideas which are really tearing us apart. And these kinds of like musings, I think, contemporary musings from Jung, I think, for me at least, echo some very things that Jesus was describing. I mean, here are some possibilities with the historical person of Jesus, how he lived and how he taught. First of all, Jesus' major image, the major symbol that he carries, and embodies and teaches about is the kingdom of God, which already just immediately evokes the very terrain I'm trying to describe. Well, what do we mean? Well, what kind of kingdoms are there? Are there kingdoms of this world? What if there's a kingdom of God, how does it work? How does it operate? What is it like? How is it like or unlike our own small kingdom, the kingdom of I, of Kent, my own narcissistic island, How is that related to something larger? And so just by saying that there is a kingdom of God is to point beyond, is to point beyond, and even point beyond our own religious and political affiliations. What if there's something larger? And of course, Jesus' major way of talking about the kingdom of God is to use stories and parables and images and symbols, because to talk about the transcendent is difficult. It's more like just evoking something, and like the finger pointing to the moon, like they say in Buddhism. And you can only say it's like this, but in doing so, it invites us on a certain kind of path. And the funny thing about Jesus is that makes him a political figure. He's not an idiot. He's not ignorant of the polis. Almost everything he says has a slight political dimension, but also is shot through with a kind of kairos, with a kind of transcendent possibility. Here are some lines. I'm not even going to work through them all, but I was just thinking about some of the kind of both and teaching that Jesus has. He says, use worldly wealth for yourself to gain friends. That way you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now, I have never even heard a sermon on that in my life. I don't think I've ever given one. It's like one of those things you want to ignore. Well, what's he even talking about? In a way, he is saying, you can play the game and be about something larger. Or how about some of his more famous lines, like when he's asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar? He says, show me a coin. First of all, he doesn't have one on him apparently, but he says, show me a coin. And whose image is this? He's like, oh, well, it's Caesar's. Well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's his response. But then he follows it by, and give to God what is God's. And the question is, what is that? That's one of those unanswerable questions. Give to Caesar what is Caesar. Well, that's obvious. It belongs to him. He minted it. His image is on it. By the way, on that coin, it says Caesar, the divine son of God. Which, how interesting is that, given what Christianity is beginning to wrestle with, what the death and resurrection of Jesus will bring forth for the Christian community. A claim that Jesus is the Son of God it's such a highly politically charged phrase. But Jesus doesn't answer, what do we owe God? He just leaves it in the lap of the listener. Or how about Jesus saying, oh, by the way, speaking of the kingdom, he doesn't say that, but he says, don't go looking for it here or there. Don't rush over to this hill or that hill, saying, here it is, it's over here. He says, the kingdom of God is within you. So wait a minute, I thought we were talking about something concrete, the presence of God in real time, in chronos, looking like this, and he just throws in a little line of, it's also within you. Don't go looking for it externally. Or how about even in the Lord's Prayer? Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That's very concrete. That's actually has to do with the world of commerce and exchange and neighbors. So he kind of moves back and forth, weaves back and forth. One moment, he seems to be saying the kingdom of God is all about how we live and act right now in the here and now in the chronological time and space. And then he weaves the other way and say, actually, it's an inner realm. It's a realm of internal possibilities. That's what I'm really talking about. It's within you, No wonder, this from the Old Testament, lean not on your own understanding. That's kind of the place this sort of spiritual teaching pulls us closer toward, dropping our own understanding of things and opening to the larger field here. And this brings me right back to Paul. I want to give you a few more lines from the book of Philippians. Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Now, I almost right away want to look at other people or politicians. But this is a much more wildly personal turn, gaze inward here. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, in earthiness, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. I mean, for some reason, I find this shocking. I have heard this verse. I probably memorized this verse, when I was in the 3rd grade. Certainly, these are some of the more popular lines, Bible verses from my childhood. But it's like they're just striking me with such power right now. Really? I'm gonna value others above myself? I mean, that's the number one thing you shouldn't do right now in our social, political, cultural climate. I value myself above other people. And in fact, that's the only way I know if I'm valuable, if I'm one up and they're one down. If I'm slightly more enlightened, slightly more righteous, slightly more liberal, slightly more conservative, whatever the case may be, in the one up, one down game. That's how the value system works. And Paul is completely turning the thing inside out, saying it's possible to value other people ahead of yourself, to put other people's interests ahead of yourself. Imagine if we lived like that for a day. What would change? What would change in our own families, not to mention like the entire globe, really. And I don't think sometimes it sounds like just in my ears that I'm I don't know, casting some sort of utopian optimistic vision. I'm saying no, I don't know what the consequences would be if we lived this way. If we took Jesus at his word, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how? How about in humility valuing other people above yourself? Man, I'd love to live into that. And this is why I just feel so drawn to this kind of this ancient wisdom in the age of mistrust and fear. Here's another line. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure. Children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Yeah, it does feel like we live in a warped and crooked generation. And well, what's the path toward being blameless or pure? And I don't think we have to be so precious about those words. They're almost like symbols of possibility here. And well, he's saying, how about not grumbling or arguing? And I think, well, what the hell would I do with my time then? If I didn't just grumble and argue and complain endlessly, feeling a combination of self-loathing and self-righteousness. How about doing things without grumbling or arguing? And the primary image that Paul puts right in the center of all this, he says, why should we do like this? Why should we be like this? Because this is the nature of Christ, who did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. That's the line. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself, and this is the word kenosis in Greek. This is an act of self-emptying, of pouring oneself out. That's what a fast is. I'm going to empty all of the ideas I have about myself and my stories and my frames of reference and what I think my worthiness is, my value. I'm going to pour it out. I'm going to empty. I'm going to pour it out and see what happens. And he's saying that's what Christ is like. And that's possible for us to live into, to pour ourselves out, to open ourselves, to not put ourselves ahead of everyone and everything, and see what happens. Like I said, I kind of wanted this to feel like a sermon, a threading together of possibilities. And I hope you hear a hint, a guess, a clue, an invitation, a possibility. Something that helps you transcend where you're stuck. And man, I felt stuck the last few months, and what a grace to feel a little less stuck. What a gift. So yeah, I hope you heard a hint, a guess, a clue for your own path. And I want to end where I began, which is this near the end of this letter to the people of Philippi. Finally, brothers and sisters. What an image, by the way, for unity. A kind of a family that transcends the family of origin here. Speaking of transcendence. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Peace be with you.